first about where your role stops and starts when you get a script, how you know what's going to be your purview versus locations. Like I looked at the Wretched and I was like, hey, cool, they found a cool tree. But no, that's not right. But you know, hey, it's a credit to your work. But I thought that was a real tree. But you had this really gnarly, character-filled tree that I thought somebody had to go find. But no, built from scratch. But talk to me about getting a script and sort of breaking it down in terms of your department, figuring out what falls under your domain. And let's start with you, Mars.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, for the Wretched, it was pretty obvious to me, I guess, because when I read scripts, this is the stuff I look for. But you really look at the action around the set, and like if it requires something really special that like, you know, doesn't normally occur in life, like someone like going into a tree and like going underground after that, and then or kind of like coming out of it, you know, most like it would be really difficult to find a hollowed out tree in the woods that met all of that criteria. So I knew immediately that would be something that we'd have to build.
Sure. Well, yeah. I assumed once you were in the tree, you were at Pinewood or something like that. But you know, I thought the outside was like a cool location.
Yeah, we actually had like a cutout opening in the back of the tree that you didn't see on camera that like the DP could get into with the camera, and so he could shoot a point of view in the forest with like the sculpted tree, you know, in the foreground and stuff, so that he could like shoot that perspective outside of the maw is what I called it, the opening to the hole. Yeah.
Very good. Well, let's back up since people are joining in. Let's talk about who you guys are. This is Mars Feehery.
Hi.
And this is Tom Hammock.
Hey guys.
They are production designers who've worked on some of the best, most visually striking horror films of the past few years. Those include The Guest, they include VHS, they include Tragedy Girls and The Wretched, films that I really enjoyed when they came out and just bought into those worlds and bought into those realities. And you guys are a crucial part of that we don't really think about or talk about enough in terms of like, you know, the creative process. I think auteur theory has screwed you guys over somewhat. You know, everybody thinks that the director it's just all him, but you guys are essential in terms of making realities on screen, right? So I do want to talk a little bit about the idea of what draws you to a project in terms of, are you replicating a reality or building a world, and do you have the luxury of choosing, you know, well, this month I want to create a whole new world. This month I want to replicate 1979 Chicago. How does it work for you guys when you're looking at projects? Tom, let me know what you think about that.
Oh man, well, honestly, a lot of it comes down to the director and the creative team. And does it feel like a great family, and is the film going to be fun? So you kind of look at that half, but then you also look at the half of, do you get to create a world or do something special or different? What can you bring to it, essentially?
Got it. What about you, Mars? What's your priority?
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely looking at the team that's involved, kind of like, you know, having like a good relationship with the director when you meet with them. And Tom and I are very fortunate that we've both like gotten to work with our friends. And I think that that our friends that are directors like really appreciate having a personal relationship with someone that they're going to collaborate with. You know, it's the same with like the DP. You know, the cinematographer and the director work so closely together. So, but yeah, and you know, if it's someone that you're meeting for the first time, it's like, you know, do we really get along really well? Like, do we have things to talk about besides the movie? And also, like, do they like my ideas? That's what I tend to focus on, is like, if I'm bringing, like what Tom said, like I'm bringing something to this story, and like, is that kind of like getting him or her excited too?
Yeah. And I noticed that in both of your CVs, you can look and see that there are these reoccurring colleagues. And, you know, you can be looking and go, oh, these are the people that must be cool to work with, you know.
Yeah.
You've just sort of stayed with them on their paths. And Tom, your path is with, I mean, you're doing so much. You've got so much work, but I noticed a through line of sort of Keith Calder's productions, and the
Yeah.
work of Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett.
Yeah, exactly. The little, grouping of people, it's fun, and Mars has crossed over into that too. She just finished a project with Simon, is pretty exciting. So no, you find those people that you want to be on set with, and things just kind of march forward.
And does it sort of aid your creative process in that you don't have to start from square one with folks, with somebody like that? You and Keith or you and Simon get on a set and you guys just sort of speak in the same shorthand? How's that work?
Exactly. I mean, the shorthand is so valuable, honestly, just because things move so fast and there's so much trust involved. It lets you focus on the things that are really important because they know that the smaller things are going to be there. That way you can work on, the haunted house finale for the guest instead of having to worry, that the picture car will be something they didn't like.
Right. And does having those relationships and those connections and that urge to sort of work with the same troupe, so to speak, is that what pulled you both into genre, or did you have a pre-existing love for the genre? Mars.
I did not have a pre-existing love for the genre. I was actually scared of horror movies. But yeah, and then I guess I did kind of get pulled into it by getting recommended to other horror movie directors. They all seem to know each other and get together for drinks. I know that's a real thing that happens because they've told me. So yeah, they discuss like collaborators all across the board, editors, everybody. So yeah, I got kind of passed around a little bit.
And as not a fan, how are you holding up? How's that going?
Oh, it like changed me. Yeah, now I really enjoy horror movies the most because they are so visual and there's so many like cool, weird challenges that tend to pop up in horror movies that you don't really get when you're doing like rom-coms or anything else. I've like done some kind of straight normal films and I get kind of bored. So,
but the normal,
so now, yeah, I prefer them.
The normal films aren't any less difficult to put together, right? Because you still got to create a reality in front of the lens that sometimes has to be built from scratch, even if it's just a store, a storefront or something, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. They're just like not as cool. There's no like exploding heads happening in normal films. Right, Tom? Like,
Oh, it's
there's
true.
no like dead cattle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your Instagram account gets way more interesting looking when you're working on a horror film, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and like the special effects, the special effects supervisor gets like a lot of the credit for all that stuff, and like that's kind of cool too to watch and just sort of be a support for that as well.
Okay.
So.
And again, keeping in mind this is production design for dummies, I'm curious if Tom, if you could shed some light on how your department works with those other departments. What's the communication pipeline like when you are given a particular task and you know that what you're building has to work in Congress with the DP and his lighting scenarios and the effects guys and their stuff has to be filmed from a certain angle, and sometimes their stuff necessitates the way you build your sets because you've got to build a floor that an effects guy can fit under or something like that. How does that stuff get sort of sorted out?
Totally. Well, I think at the beginning you have that special honeymoon period with the director, and you're trying to come up with the rules of the world and what is the look that the whole film has to conform to, no matter what else comes into play. And then as soon as you really have that, then you can kind of get into all the technical aspects. And it's really about bringing people together. And obviously I just finished a production where it was a little harder to do in COVID world, but for instance, on Death Note with Adam Wingard, you have the main bedroom set where the demon creature shows up for the first time. And for that, we built a white model so that everybody would come in and gather around the DP, special effects, visual effects, everyone would come together and decide, should the creature be puppeteered from the bottom? Should we do it in wires from the top? And then at that point, you figure out, are you cutting ceiling slots? Are you removing ceiling panels? And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, it's raining, and everything, you know, starts to come together, and you come up with the plan. So, you know, you want to have that family dinner with everybody gathered around something to figure it all out.
Got it. And Mars, I'm curious about your level of involvement with like design that goes beyond, like, I keep going back to the obvious thing of you've got to build this tree, but like that witch in the Wretched, that swamp witch or whatever the hell the name they used for her. Were you involved in those discussions? Do you weigh in on, well, like this would work better for what you're trying to do here? Talk to me about, like, when you get a script, where do your thumbprints sort of happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I was involved at the very beginning, where most of the direction came from the directors, obviously. Like, they talked to Eric Porn, our special effects coordinator for that, and he designed and built the witch, the mask that she wore, and like the costume and everything. Like, he did all of that with the directors, and I sort of like came in at the beginning to sort of like, I guess, just kind of like be involved and stuff, because I had also started designing, so I wanted our looks to sort of match a little bit. And then we kind of parted so that like we could focus on our own things. And then at the end, we came back together before we shot to make sure that the colors were right. And like, he really wanted like her skin to match the color that I was using for the tree. And like, I needed the tree to match, like, or the dirt and mud and stuff, like, to match the environment. So it was all kind of like, it all like had to come together right at the right time. So that's sort of how that process worked. I don't know if that's how it's supposed to go, but.
Well, you know, that's an interesting thing that you say, because I wonder, is there one way, or is
I don't think there is. Tom would probably know better than me. But I feel like it's a different thing on every movie, you know, because they all have their own weird challenges. And like for the Wretched, like we were building our set in Los Angeles and having it shipped out. Like the cave set was built in LA and then shipped to Michigan where we shot it. So, and that's something that like, I don't think anybody really anticipated that's how we would end up doing that.
Well, okay. When you say that no one anticipated that, how does that then come to fruition? Is it your job to break that bad news to the producer that, listen, there's some shipping costs you haven't thought of here? Like, how does that sort of, is that your job to sort of tell people how that has to go?
Yeah, it is. Well, in that case, it was because the producer sort of expected that everything would be done in Michigan. And I was like, well, you know, there isn't really like a crew there that I think can handle this. So I had found a construction coordinator in LA that it was his idea. He was like, here's my plan. Like, I'll build it in my backyard in pieces and sections and stuff, and they'll all fit together like perfectly. And we'll put it on a trailer and we'll drive it. And he's like, I've done this before. It's no big deal. And I was like, oh, okay. That sounds great. And it turns out he was kind of, I don't know if he's watching, but he was the only person that had any kind of like plan, and had, you know, the resume and the skills and the experience and everything to really pull that off. So I trusted him. And it's just like, I found somebody that I trusted, and I was like, we have to go with this plan. And I think it's going to work out and it's going to look really good. It's going to like look better if we do it this way than if we just kind of like stumble around in the woods, like trying to kind of make this cave with like people that don't know what they're doing. That's just how I preferred to work it. And it worked out fine. It actually didn't end up costing that much more than if we had done it with inexperienced people who would have taken longer and would have, you know, there would have been mistakes made. Like, that's normal. So
sure.
Yeah.
And that in the world of sort of indie horror or indie filmmaking in general, if you're not with your normal crew, your squad, there's got to be a learning curve there for some of these newer novice, up and coming filmmakers. And it's sort of your guys' job to kind of no, this is kind of how you do it? Do you have to sort of like get them up to speed? You end up being like tutors?
Yeah, definitely. And I've done that with lots of crew, and it's worked out fine.
You're a good teacher, maybe.
Worked out most of the time. It's worked out fine. But sometimes you get like that one time that like it doesn't work out fine, and that's very costly and a little traumatizing for everyone. So I just try to minimize that if I can.
Got it. Tom, what's your experience in that realm?
Oh, well, you know, it's always the same thing. It's about nudging kind of the production in the right direction early on so that you set it up to succeed instead of setting it up to fail. You know, because there's so many of those early decisions about the locations and are you going to do things in camera? What's the visual effects component that, you know, you try to make sure they align so that as other people join the team, there's a clear path forward, I guess.
Got it. Some folks talk about making films as like you're fighting a war, like and a lot of the language used to describe filmmaking is very aggressive and violent sounding, and it sounds like you've been through some shit at the end, you know, and you're sort of like different on the other side of it. But what's the best part? What's your favorite part about the job? Tom, tell me first.
Oh man, honestly, making movies with friends is just the best. And you know, that only happens a certain number of times in a career, but when it does, it's just fantastic.
What about you, Mars?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's definitely the best. And also making new friends. I've met, you know, I've worked everywhere in the country almost, and I've met people on those films that I just had no idea how it was going to go, and we turned out being like best friends. So
well,
yeah,
it's a profound experience that you go through with these folks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
And instead of a photo album or something, you've got a whole film at the end that sort of
totally
snapshot.
Yeah, it's so rewarding to like go through all of that, you know, pain. And then you know when you're in it, you only kind of sometimes you only think about the bad stuff, and then at the end you finally watch the movie, and you know after like a couple months maybe, and then it's like, oh yeah, I remember like that idea that I had that worked out so well, and that always makes me really happy.
They say that that mothers can't remember the pain of childbirth, and that's why they have other kids, right? So it might be a similar experience. Yeah. So Tom, if this is a dead end, just tell me. But do you get involved in sort of ethereal discussions about the script? I'm thinking about The Guest, for example, and how The Guest, before it goes where it goes, it's a very sad film, and there's a sadness in the frame. Does that stuff get communicated to you in terms of like, that's a home that has lost a child, and how does that translate?
Yeah, I mean, with all those themes, we had a lot of discussions about it because, I mean, The Guest is its own curious kind of movie because the opening third is really a Sundance film, you know, which is how Adam and Simon described it. And then you kind of go off the rails into an 80s action movie, and then you end up in kind of Terminator as horror film towards the end. But yeah, just because the house had to have all of those, you know, you're subtly trying to back up the sadness and that there is a lost child and all of that. And just work it through. And then of course the movie design wise begins to change, right? So, I don't know, Mars, any thoughts?
Yeah, I always like to, when I'm talking with directors of horror, I want to make sure that we don't focus on just making it scary looking, and like also bring in those like any kind of details that we can to make it feel real, just like really authentic. So like if it is like a sad story, like they've lost a child, then you know really try to convey that. It just makes the scary stuff hit so much harder.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And with Tragedy Girls, you said you didn't do horror before that film, or not much before that film?
No, I did horror before that for sure. Tyler McIntyre, the director, and I had done Patchwork, which was his kind of first movie that he did in LA. And that won Screamfest in 2015. That was a very low budget, like $100,000, I think, max budget for that movie.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, I had done that, and I think some other horror movies.
Well, what I was teeing up there, which maybe doesn't make sense now, is that I think Tragedy Girls, it's what stands out for it, what people remember is the aesthetic of it, which is very much not the aesthetic of a horror film.
Yeah.
It's very candy colored and was that like part of initial discussions, or was that a discovery along the way? Talk to me about how you got to the visuals of that film.
Yeah, it was both. Tyler really wanted like those masks that we had, like he basically designed those himself. They were like 100%, I think, out of his mind. He just Tyler also like just really has a clear idea of what he wants. He comes from an editing background, so he knows exactly what parts of the shot he's going to use. And, you know, he would like tell on Patchwork, he would tell me to like, you can cut corners here and here and here. And I was like, I don't believe you, but he turned out to be right. And so on Tragedy Girls, we worked together again, and he, you know, when he said he wanted something, that I just gave him exactly what he wanted, because I knew that I could trust him. So yeah, with the aesthetic, a lot of that was just like he wanted it to just be really fun. Like the two main characters, they also brought a lot of that kind of energy to it. And I remember when we were discussing one of the girls' rooms, it was Sadie's room, the producer came to me and he was like, "What are you thinking for the color palette?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I got this like kind of like hippie thing, and like she's so like, you know, I don't really remember what I said," but he was like, "How about hot pink?" I was like, "Oh, that's a choice." And he showed me this artist. He was like, I can get these posters printed, and we can get this artwork cleared and stuff. And it was like all this like vibrant, you know, hot pink colors and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, that's like the masks. So that's sort of how that, I think, that's where it went eventually. And it was a collaboration with everybody, like DP, Pavel, and Tyler, and the producers. So
yeah. And you know, I don't know if you're paying attention to what's going on out there, but there's like Tragedy Girls has led to this whole horror color palette of like women-centric horror. A lot of them are just sort of like Instagram photographers, or even that new film Promising Young Woman, where they're all leaning into that color palette now. And I find it really interesting how it, like I said, it really jump-started the idea of letting color happen in horror. I think it was a big part of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I want to ask Tom about Godzilla versus Kong in relation to some of this other stuff. And I know you can't talk about it too much, but who wins? No.
Someone would kill me.
Yes. No, but I am curious because it feels like a giant seismic shift between like shooting The Guest in a practical location and now you're doing Godzilla versus Kong. How does your skill set translate to just that different canvas? Or am I overthinking it?
Oh man, well, you know, it does translate. And look, the hope with Godzilla versus Kong is when Adam and I were talking about it really early on, and he was trying to make the choice of what to do next, he wanted to do it as basically as in camera as possible. So we built like 50 sets, you know, in a film that one would think of as being very CG heavy, and obviously the creatures are, but I think people will be surprised how much is there and how much is really built. You know, we're building sets on the side of cliffs and in the middle of jungles, and you know, I mean, Adam got a helicopter to go to Greenland for real to shoot ice shelves, you know. So within that regard, it's not all that different from The Guest. It's just a bigger scale, and you're sort of churning through sets a little quicker, which is a bit dismaying. but yeah, it works out in the end. So I'm super excited about it.
And is that I'm sorry that I don't know the answer to this, but is this the biggest film you've ever worked on?
It is. It might be the biggest film I will ever work on, honestly. Yeah.
I feel like I should ask follow-up questions, but maybe I shouldn't. How was it? How was ramping up your workload like that?
It was great. I mean, you have a great team and everything just comes together. I mean, honestly, the biggest issue or problem was we shot on multiple Hawaiian islands, in Hong Kong, in Greenland, and Australia, and the jet lag was such a beatdown. That's where it became really problematic. But otherwise, it was really a wonderful experience. And it has problems like every film, ends up with difficulties. Like The Guest, honestly, nothing was as bad as what we went through on The Guest to find pumpkins, for instance, which you wouldn't think is a big deal. For Simon, such an easy line to write. And then, that's part of film, right? You become an expert on things you would never think you have to become an expert on. And one of them is that pumpkins take 110 or 120 days to grow, and you can't plant them until the last frost has happened. So when you're making a movie in May, and we were literally shooting in the pumpkin capital of the world, but you're making this movie in May, pumpkins aren't going to show up for another 4 months. And man, it is really difficult to end up with them. So
Who knew?
there you go.
Yeah, it's true. Out of season fruit
Is that your biggest? Is
so
that the bane
hard.
of your existences?
Yeah, actually,
Can be.
yeah.
Amazing.
I
For
hadn't
folks
thought about that, but yeah.
for folks that are watching, there's a Q&A tab, and you can ask questions of these folks. I have one question here so far I'm going to ask you guys from William Lewis. He says, "Hi, I'm a student filmmaker, and I was wondering how can I improve my production design and have it look great with a very limited budget?" Obviously, he didn't like my answer. So you guys, what do you got?
Mars?
Well, if you can find someone to help you out for free that is passionate about production design, I think that goes a long way, because I've done some projects with very little money, and where there's a will, there's a way. You just have to get a will.
Yeah.
Right,
I would say to a certain extent it comes down to framing and finding the right locations. So
Yeah.
just search and search and search, and then set up the rules of your world, and then be absolutely diligent that you don't break them in the framing. Like if you've decided you're not going to show any red in your film until the big kill shows up, don't shoot a single stop sign, right? That'll keep your production value that much more when you get to the point. So just always be careful with what's in frame.
That's a really good answer, William. I hope you were listening. John Estrada asks, how early do production designers get brought to a film?
Should be one of the first people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely it works out best if it's as early as possible.
Totally. I mean, in a standard indie, what do you think, Mars? It's kind of somewhere between 5 and 7 weeks in kind of the usual indie world. And then there's like the 2-week version, which is a disaster.
Yeah, I've done the 2-week version.
Yeah.
A few times. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's usually when I do the 2-week version, it's because they had someone at 5 weeks and that person got a better job.
I won't ask you to name the film, but have you ever been brought on too late?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And what goes wrong when you're brought on too late? Why is that bad?
It's just damage control. Like you're not really designing anything. You're not making any creative choices. You're not like helping the story along. You're just doing damage control. Just like, go find a plant,
Yeah, I would say that things end up costing much more money if you're building anything when you're brought on really late. And then also with locations, I mean, locations are everything. And if you're early, you can have choices, and the later you're brought on, the fewer choices there are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
There's another question here from Arilyn Anderson, and the question is, thanks for all your time to us. You give to us scare fans. That's nice. If you could do a dream set location, what would it be?
I would really like to do like a London smoking room, like a gentleman's club. That's it. Like a London gentleman's club, like a really, really expensive.
Like luxurious.
You know what that, yeah, just like, you know, like the big heavy drapes and like the atmosphere in the air and like the fireplaces and stuff. I don't know. I just have kind of an obsession with gentlemen's clubs, probably because I would never be allowed in one. And if I'm designing a movie with one, then I would, I guess, have to somehow find my way onto one.
Okay.
Or I would just build my own.
Excellent. Tom?
Oh, exactly. I mean, I think you're always fascinated with the things you don't really get to do very often, like gentlemen's clubs. I mean, for me, it kind of comes down to, with another friend of mine, I write comic books, and kind of the goal with that is always to end up researching and drawing something that you're never going to get the chance to do. And so in that case, I'd say like an ossuary, you know, where skeletons are articulated and put back together after they've been cleaned, you know, but doing a period space for that, kind of fascinating, you know.
Cool.
Devil in the
Like
White City kind of world.
Like the Paris catacombs kind of situation?
Exactly, where you're taking them, but then the scientific version where you're wiring all the bones back together. They used to have these special rooms, you know, for doing that, for Darwin and all the old scientists, and it'd just be such a cool thing to get to do.
Yes.
Neat.
If either of you are ever in Philadelphia after COVID, give me a holler. I want to take you to the Mutter Museum. It's a museum of medical curiosities. And they've got some cool rooms that I think you'd be interested in, Tom.
Oh, fantastic.
Just putting that out there. Okay, so a question from Mouse. Have either of you been on a set that was predominantly shooting on a mobile device? If so, what was that experience like? How did that affect your process? Like an iPhone movie.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I have not actually.
Yeah, I haven't either.
I didn't know that people actually did that.
Well, it's like there's a lot of really, really low budget folks, and then Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah. Oh, right.
And
Steven
I feel like if you're not doing the Steven Soderbergh one, you probably don't want to do the other ones. That's my. So okay. So no experience with iPhone movies, Mouse. Sorry.
No.
Jessica Safavamir asks, what is the weirdest item you have had to find for a set?
Tom, you go first.
Oh man, well, I guess the pumpkins for the guests weren't all that weird. I would say for this HBO show Outcast, Adam and I and the prop master Joe Arnold had to find a 1930s deck of erotic playing cards. And that was really, really difficult to find. And we ended up finding a deck out of Europe. And then as it was in transit, the scene got cut. So what can you do?
Yeah. My pumpkin story was actually a dragon fruit, and it was out of season, and I didn't like really realize that it was out of season before I started calling like every single grocery store in Los Angeles, and they didn't know if it was in season either. So they were like, dragon fruit, no, we don't have that right now. So I called the next one. And then I ended up, I was dating someone at the time that was like a paper mache artist. And I was like, will you make me a dragon fruit like tonight? And he was like, yeah.
It's a keeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he made it, but it looks like paper mache. And I showed it to the director and he was like, no. no, we'll just
Yeah.
change the line. And yeah, so I think we ended up using some other exotic fruit instead. But that's a pretty good story for low budget times.
Traumatized by produce until
Yeah.
the tales of production design, right?
Right.
It's weird we're into that so much, but literally on the guest, we had a team of 6 people calling every single agricultural school in the southern United States to find out who had some sort of pumpkin project going in greenhouses, and then paying people to walk these greenhouses and see if there was an early pumpkin that had just turned orange. And we did end up finding 8 eventually, but that's why if you rewatch the scene, the pump where they're carving out on the lawn, the pumpkins were really hard to carve because they were technically green, even though they were just orange enough for us to use. That's why you see David like taking the big swings with his knife, which ended up being great for the character ultimately. But that's the secret. He's really trying to puncture it in there.
It was not ripe. Amazing. Okay, so here's a question from James Thomas. What are some of the odder or smaller detailed elements that seem to come up consistently across projects that wouldn't usually be the most obvious to an amateur filmmaker or general viewer? I feel like we're kind of covering some of this fruit
things
stuff.
that sound ordinary but are actually really hard to
Yeah.
do.
I have one. I would say the masks in Your Next. And it's something to consider is that in that case, you know, Adam Wingard loves doing really long takes, and Simon had written these scenes where you have to take a single mask and without cutting, you take a character from outside in moonlight, indoors into regular lighting, into a flashlit or candlelit condition, all within a single take. And having a mask that'll photograph across all of those different lighting conditions is actually incredibly difficult. And so what we ended up doing as part of the mask design is those masks are actually 30 or 40 different layers of airbrushed, just building up the paint. And you can see they get darker to the edges and whiter to the front of the muzzles of the animals. And that allowed them to photograph in all of these different conditions and have this depth to them no matter how you were looking at it. And obviously for all of us who love horror films, masks are so important. And that's something just to think about, is that it took weeks to do to get the paint dry. So we'd do a week's worth of painting and then we'd photograph it and test it next to a candle, next to a flashlight, and see if it was there yet. And when it wasn't, we went and then spent another week adding layers. And we ended up spending literally a month doing that to the masks.
And how does it feel when no one notices that? I mean, that means you did your job perfectly, right? But it's got to be a little bit.
It can, I mean, Mars, it can be a little mixed. Sometimes it's fine, and sometimes you're just like, oh.
No, but there's always that one person on Twitter that's like, hey, shout out to whoever designed that one thing in the background that I really liked. And you're like, yes. You rule.
Yep. Nice.
Like on Tragedy Girls, there was I remember there was one person that posted something about we built this giant iceberg in the prom scene because it was a Titanic theme. And I remember they barely kind of shot it. It was just sort of like an afterthought in the background. And it was my favorite part of that set. And Pavel and Tyler were kind of yeah, but it's just they were so focused on other things. I was like, shoot the iceberg, guys, come on, shoot it. But then at the end I kind of liked that it was sort of like an afterthought, and nobody noticed it except for that one person on Twitter.
Twitter's good for something.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because you got to design a prom.
Yeah.
And how was that? Was that an emotional thing for you? How was your own prom? A lot of baggage, or
no?
It's all good.
No, it was really fun. That was one of my production design bucket list items, was to do a high school prom. And it was just really fun because I I could direct my crew to like, don't make it look too good. Make it look like cheerleaders did this. You know, we want to make it look high school-y, like not like professional film stuff. That was actually much harder. That's one of those things that is really hard to get people to do, is to dumb it down a little, like make it look kind of bad. Like, don't do your best, because everybody that works in our business is like very talented. So
does it bother you when you see like a high school prom that is just way too production designed on TV or whatnot?
yeah, but then you're like, I know they had fun, so.
But you're probably one of the folks that notice that stuff when somebody's not just missed the authentic, you know, value there, right?
Yeah, no, I understand. It's really hard to not go overboard with a prom.
Yeah, I will say I always go overboard with Adam, and the reason is because Adam didn't go to prom because I believe he's told me he left high school early to start directing Homesick, his first feature, and then just, you know, worked on the side to get his degree. And so he never went to prom. And so he has this obsession with high school dances. He's like added a high school dance to like practically every film we've ever done.
Wow.
So, you know, maybe not in Godzilla, but otherwise there are a lot of high school dances, and he always wants to go all out, which is a ton of fun.
It's kind of like a movie thing too. It's like, so everybody kind of forgives it. But because we had such a tight budget on Tragedy Girls, I was like, now guys, remember.
See, now this brings us back to if the producers bring Mars and I on early, we would suggest that the dance is the last thing you shoot, thus you can also have the wrap party in the same space. And if you don't bring us on early, you miss out the wonderful decorated wrap party that you could have had if you'd scheduled it right.
Yeah, unless you burn the gym down at the end.
Yeah. Well,
yes, Brian De Palma did not have the Carrie wrap party at the prom.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I have another question here from Ingrid Larson. Ingrid says, I'm a huge fan of both of your work. Is there a favorite horror film either of you have worked on? And let's pretend that none of your bosses or coworkers are watching.
Favorite one I've worked on?
And, you know, I don't know if Ingrid means like it was your favorite movie or if it was your favorite work experience. So you can be liberal in your interpretation.
I think The Wretched was probably my favorite to design. Because I mostly like picked that movie. I picked that job to because there was a cave and a cool tree to design. Yeah, so it was like really neat to, because I love nature and I like hiking and stuff. So it's nice to like go out and like look at rotting trees and like get inspired. And look at all of the past movies that have done caves and trees and stuff in them, and just kind of like see, you know, what they did right and wrong and everything.
And so for people watching who maybe haven't seen The Wretched, it is an epic tree. It's just like, it works so well with that character. Like there's a verisimilitude thing happening with that tree and that witch and that whole, oh man, I watched it at a film festival last year with the director, Brett, co-director. Mm-hmm. It was so fun. I really loved it. It was a year ago this week, man.
Yeah, you don't even see the whole tree in the movie.
You need to.
Yeah, I think you see it at night, and it actually looks better at night.
I'm gonna say best tree since Empire Strikes Back, when Luke went in there to fight himself.
That was our reference. That was me and my scenic painter Bonnie Goodson, who's a genius. I think she showed me this like picture of Luke like in the cave.
Yeah.
She was like, "Look, it looks just like it." I was like,
yeah, the way those roots are kind of. Mm-hmm. I love it. I don't think Tom answered this question. Favorite movie?
Man, I'll always go back to All the Boys Love Mandy Lane because it was a really lovely experience. And, you know, there's something special about those early movies in your career. and we got to design a cattle pit full of dead cows. So, you know, that was kind of a blast.
And when you have a job like that, maybe some folks don't realize, but Mandy Lane sat on a shelf for a number of years, and it was hard to see. Like people kept waiting for that to get a proper release. Is that frustrating for you when you work that hard on something, and then and I guess you're probably both going through this now with COVID and whatnot, like your films aren't getting seen in a very timely fashion maybe, but I know Mandy Lane sat on a shelf for a while because of some distribution problems before we got to see it.
Yeah, that honestly was agony. I mean, you know, all of us who made that film are still friends, and it was just really hard to have it be purchased and there be so much excitement about it, and then have literally 2 different companies go bankrupt in the process of releasing it. But luckily it eventually got out there. But man, it was hard.
I was one of the folks that it didn't get to see it until it hit streaming, I think, and it was, you know, it was worth it. But man,
Yeah.
that movie was taking on like a legendary status for a couple of years there.
I know it was, and you know, in many ways you worry that it gets built up a little bit too much, just because of how things are. But yeah, believe me, it was definitely frustrating for everyone involved.
Totally. Andrew Hamilton asks, well, first he says, thanks for your time. I want to make sure when they're polite, I want to let you know. Oh, wait. All right. First, John Estrada, who doesn't say thanks for your time, but John says, what is the most frustrating conversation you've ever had with a director? No need to name drop, he adds. And if it was about pumpkins, I'm just going to skip to the next question.
Frustrating conversation.
I had a conversation where we had dressed one half of a street in period, and the director said, "This is fantastic. We're going to shoot this way." And it happens, you know, you get there late, light changes. I completely get it.
Tell me the math of that. How much time was wasted? How long did it take to redo it?
To sort of half redo it, everybody scrambled, and it was a couple of hours. In this case, it was a period situation, so that meant no red curbs. So you're yanking, you know, frisket paper off of red curbs on one side, moving them to another, taking down street signs, cutting off a couple of parking meters, and then hoping for the best with the city. So very cool hand Luke. But you know, you get there in the end. So
Tom, you and I are the only 2 people on this whole thing that understood that Cool Hand Luke reference. I'm going to tell you.
Sorry.
I mean, everybody watching too. Do you have a horror story about a director conversation, frustration-wise, Mars?
Yeah. I did a movie that it was a period film in West Texas called The Iron Orchard, and very low budget, but the film like takes place over like 3 decades, and there were sets in there that we would shoot scenes like in each decade, you know, like people's houses and stuff. So we'd have to like redecorate the whole house, essentially like to show, you know, progression of wealth, because that's also a big theme of the movie, is like the guy starts off with nothing and then he eventually like gets rich, and he becomes this big evil oil tycoon guy. And I was like trying to show that progression of wealth in like the one set, and I kept having to explain to the director over and over and over again like why I needed the time that I was asking for. Like he wanted to shoot this location in one day, and we had like 3 or 4 scenes to shoot that day, and I had to redecorate the set like every single time. So I was like, this is what we're gonna do, and you're gonna listen to me. We're gonna shoot it backwards. We're gonna shoot the, like, when he's the wealthiest, we're gonna shoot that scene first. Mm-hmm. And then we're gonna gradually like take things away, because it's faster for me to undecorate the set than it is for me to decorate the set. And like he'd go like and talk to the DP, and they'd come back and he'd be like, actually, we're going to do it different because of the light or something. And I was like, you don't understand. That is not going to be possible. And I would like, that was like the first time I told him. And then the next time I was like getting more frustrated about it. And then eventually I was, you know, I was just like, if this is not on the schedule the way that I told you to do it, like we're going to have big problems.
Wow. Is that an exciting creative thing though, when you have to sort of like feed a narrative of what you're doing, where you're like, I'm gonna build this progression of time where
and they eventually like, we did it my way in the end, and it worked out great, and it actually took us less time than I thought it would for those transitions to happen, because we had talked about it so much, mainly because I was super, you know, on my game with that set, because I didn't want to let them down, especially after I'd made such a big deal out of it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, back to Andrew Hamilton, who did thank you for your time. When reading a script, do you appreciate when a screenwriter has left room for the production designer to dream, or are specifics always appreciated?
I think I appreciate specifics, and I appreciate where there's room to dream. It's like if a script is really well written, then like the sets just kind of jump out at you and you're like, oh yeah. And then it's really easy to design. And that's nice. But if there's room to dream, then you can really kind of bring your own ideas to it. And that also kind of sets you apart from the other designers that are meeting with them. So that's actually very helpful. Gotcha.
And Tom, like Godzilla versus Kong, just a bunch of blank pages, right?
Yeah, exactly. It just says they fight, and then
and then you fill in the rest. Have at it.
Totally. No, I mean, it's one of those things, if it's a writer director and they want a blue Volvo station wagon, then that's fine. But otherwise, for the writer, I tend to kind of ignore what's written, because it's just a different, generally it's a different thing. And because the thing is, I don't know if this is the case for Mars, but for me, you read so many indie scripts and they take place in places where writers go to write. So it takes place in small apartments and in coffee houses and in bars, as opposed to thinking about all the possibilities a space could be. So I'll always bring, you know, other location ideas to the table if it's, you know, a straight writer. But if it's a writer director, then that's a different situation generally.
That's great. I'm going to start doing that.
Okay.
I've never heard that before.
I knew this was going to be good for me.
I mean, I'm thinking of a good example. So this was a film that didn't happen, but just to sort of articulate what I had in mind. So it was a film about dirty cops, and the film opens in a booth at a diner, okay? And you have 5 minutes of dialogue between the two cops discussing what they're going to do, right? And eventually the food comes, the bill comes, they don't pay, they leave. And that means that at the opening of your film, you're stuck in 2 close-ups, 2 overs, and a 2 shot for 5 minutes in a row, right? And so I went in and pitched, why don't we start in the alley out back, and you're with these 2 cops and they're talking as they're going in by the dumpsters through the back door of this diner, and all of a sudden you have the kitchen with fire and reflections and waitresses moving, and as they go by the warming tables with the food waiting, one of them reaches out and takes a bite of someone's sandwich and puts it back, and then they sit down in the booth, and by the time you've done that, 75% of your scene is done, and it's been exciting, and you only have to deal with 25% of the time kind of locked into that regular coverage. If that helps sort of explain the thought process.
Sure.
But anyway, there you go.
So
for better or worse.
Then I have to wonder, like, Tom, do you have aspirations or interest in directing eventually?
Oh, I mean, I've directed a movie, but you
Okay.
know, Adam,
Sorry.
Adam and Simon pressed me into it. What, what can you do?
What
No,
did
I
you
mean, I
direct?
think, pardon?
What did you direct?
I directed a film called The Last Survivors.
Huh.
So, you know,
Oh, I'm
little
sorry, I didn't know that.
tiny movie. No, no,
I
that's
apologize.
okay.
Directed The
No,
Last
it's
Survivors
fun.
and that guy's diner scene.
Well, that movie didn't get, the diner movie didn't get made, but you know, ultimately, I think it's just about the filmmaking process, and that's what's exciting. And you know, in terms of that one film I directed, what had happened is Adam and Simon and I had been on a film together, and that film had collapsed too late in the year to get another movie, and this opportunity had come up. So Adam and Simon, you know, kindly said, you got to direct it. If you direct it, Adam said, I'll write it. And both of them offered to come do stunts in the film. So it's like, all right, I'm stuck. And there you go.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
crazy.
Mouse is back to let us know that Tangerine and Unsane were shot on iPhones. That's
It's
true.
true. Yeah.
Unsane is an amazing thriller, says Mouse. But you know what? It was Soderbergh, so my point stands.
Cool. I want to
Um,
watch those.
yeah, Unsane's really good. Unsane is
Yeah.
a really good paranoid thriller that's sort of about like it sort of hit right when the Me Too thing was going on, but it's also got a lot of political stuff about the healthcare system in America, and was shot on a damn iPhone. It's really good.
Huh.
Um,
Yeah.
Awesome.
Tangerine's really beautiful. Like Tangerine's really special.
Tangerine is yeah is geez, I forget the gentleman's name. Sean Baker, I
Yeah.
believe, made it, and he did the Florida
Cool.
Project after that. Yeah, Tangerine is also worth watching. I believe it's on Netflix.
I've seen some really great Instagram stories lately too. Those are shot on iPhones.
Sure, TikTok. You know, like the future is mobile, I guess.
I
But
know, like those cameras are great now.
I'm
So.
I'm I'm still a fan of a nice prime lens. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, okay. So Michael Volpe asks, can you suggest to a director that lines be changed if you have such a hard time finding an item, aka the dragon fruit? Michael's paying attention. Or do you try your best and leave that decision up to the director?
Yeah, I usually come to him crying, saying, please change it. No.
So does Tom, weirdly.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally can call the tears up on command.
Yes.
I mean, I think, you know, Fincher has a good quote about this where he says, even having this conversation is a compromise. So, you know, that's the Fincher of it all. Um,
Stealing that, by the way.
it, exactly. It's a good one, but
Ouch.
no,
That would be hard to hear from. I would feel awful
it,
if I was working for Fincher and he said that to me.
it would, but no, I'll always make the suggestions because often, you know, making films, especially lower budget films, it's about where you focus the money, and you want to bring them the options and whatever information is possible to bring so that they can help make the decision on where the money goes. You know, so obviously to go back to pumpkins, it was so important that it became worth it for Adam to focus a bunch of resources on that. But a lot of times you're like, do you really need to go to all that length to get the right keychain for the car? Maybe
Yeah,
not.
actually, sometimes to answer the question seriously, I'll try to come up with a better idea and kind of spin it like that was a good idea, but this is like a really good idea because of like not because I can't find the thing or because it's too hard or too expensive, but like, wouldn't it be really cool if like we did this instead? I wish I had an example, but I don't right now.
Okay. James Thomas has an interesting question. On low budgets, is it legally hard to decorate with art, books, movies, or he says knickknacks? And I think what he's meaning is like copyrighted IP, you know, and whatnot.
Yeah, great question. And the answer is yes.
Yeah. Assuming that you're going to get distribution, which everybody wants, yeah, it is hard. But it's the artwork that's hard because you always want to respect other artists. So you want to be careful of paintings, photographs. But as far as product, I'm you know, a big fan of, if it's being used in the manner it's meant to be used, just fair use. So the Coke can's great to have in the scene as long as it doesn't distract, but you don't want anybody killing someone with a Coke can. So I think have at it, but otherwise you want to respect other artists.
And is it a
Yeah.
little frustrating for you when you see such obviously fake brands being like maybe a little too prominently, you know, Greeked in a shot?
Yes, I hate Greeking,
Yeah.
especially after, you know, what Tom just said, which is the absolute truth. I mean, I don't, but it really also depends on like how good your lawyers are. I think, because if this is just what I've kind of deduced from my 10 years as a production designer, is that like if you're on a really low budget movie and they have kind of like low budget lawyers, the lawyers will say, don't use any products because we don't know how to defend you.
Yeah, versus, you know, I did a film called Blind Spotting about a police shooting, and it opens in an Uber, which is very clearly, it should not be an Uber, but we had a really great lawyer who figured out how to make it happen. But you know, for horror, ultimately, you just don't want to be sympathy for Mr. Vengeance with Baskin Robbins is kind of your goal.
Can you give context to what you just said for those who might not know?
There's a sequence in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, the Korean revenge film, where a Baskin Robbins frozen ice cream cake is not only is the product in terms of the cake destroyed, but then the ice cream box travels through a multitude of gruesome crime scenes involving everything from intravenous drug use to cannibalism. And the box is prominently featured. And you know, you don't want to end up with that situation in your film. So
What happened? Yeah. Did they get sued by Baskin Robbins?
I don't know what ultimately happened. I think it might have something to do with that film is not prominently released here. You know, sort of like Fish Story with all the Beatles songs.
Yeah.
So,
right.
What can you do?
They get really mad. Producers get really mad if you end up with a product in there that they didn't approve and can't clear, or a piece of artwork rather, not the product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No one told me how long this is supposed to go, and we're at an hour, so I'm going to combine the last two questions for you guys, and I think that's it, right?
Okay.
I don't know what your commitment level was to this project. You know, we can keep talking, but
whatever works.
Whatever works. God, Tom must be a dream on sets. He's just such a agreeable, affable fella.
That's what I've heard.
Uh-oh.
I love it. So Ingrid asks, do either of you have a background in theater or did you start in film? And John Estrada says, what skills and qualities do you feel would help an aspiring production designer? So I guess if I was going to slam those two questions together, I'd be like, what made you get into this? What affinity or skill sets did you guys have that put you on this path?
Yeah, I do have a background in theater. I have a Bachelor of Arts in theater with a focus on like backstage stuff. And I did a lot of stage managing. I didn't do any set design in theater. I did stage managing and costume design. And costume design actually is great in theater because that's, the costume designer is kind of like the star designer in theater because like they get the biggest budget. So I really learned how to be a designer and like a collaborator and stuff in theater doing that. And then the stage management skills also came in really handy because you're managing like lots of people and egos and, you know, also like you also have to be focused on the story and time commitments and everything, time management rather. Yeah, those are all really good skills. And then and Tom and I both went to AFI for production design. And that's where I learned how to do all the technical stuff involving sets. But really like the passion for storytelling and design came from theater. So yeah, I'd say that's a great way to start.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was out of the architecture world. So that's, you know, that's also like theater where a lot of people come from, just because people don't necessarily realize how much is built on films. Like on a big film, millions and millions and millions of dollars just like goes into sets. It's shocking how much gets built. So anyway, it was a good way in, likewise.
Gotcha. What's your, do you look at any particular films as being just masterpieces of production design that you think about when someone like me asks you that question just now that I did?
Night of the Hunter.
Yes.
Life Aquatic.
Both great answers. But
Yeah.
Tom, for folks that might not know about Night of the Hunter, can you sort of explain why it's so special?
Oh man, so it's Charles Langdon, the great character actor. It's the only film he ever directed, and it's kind of German expressionist, but Depression era US. And both Mars and I went to school with a great production designer named Robert Boyle, and who designed Hitchcock films, The Birds, North by Northwest. And his friend had designed Night of the Hunter, and Night of the Hunter was super cheap in that there's a lot of forced perspective work in it, and yet it created a couple of the most iconic images in film. The woman under the water with the reeds in the car, moving with her hair, or the room when you're inside with Shelley Winters and Robert Mitchum's outside singing, and then the girl comes in with the candle, and it causes the window to go from being see-through to being reflected only on the inside. And that was a trick with silks that they did. I mean, there's just so many aspects to that film that are just genius. I'd give it a watch if you can.
Thumbs up. Do you think that kind of sort of impressionistic theatricality that's in that film, where it's like you look at it, you're like, this is very obviously artificial, but I'm buying in anyway. Do you think that sort of aesthetic could fly today?
It's hard. I think you have to get the audience to completely buy into it, right? I think that it exists more in the realm of, say, a Pan's Labyrinth than in most normal releases, ultimately, unfortunately.
Got it. And you said Life Aquatic, Mars, and Wes Anderson's got such a sort of very, I don't want to say something uncharitable, but it's very specific sort of dollhouse mentality about his aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Why that one versus, say, any of the other ones?
Yeah, that movie is not even actually my favorite Wes Anderson movie, but there is a lot of like really bold choices, and it's obvious that he was like going for a specific aesthetic, and it's also just executed really well. Just like, I mean, the ship set being like kind of that cut out cross section of, it's like very theatrical, and you have to like shoot it in a specific way. It's like, it's really ballsy of him to like choose, you have to basically decide this is how we're going to shoot this film, and there's literally no room to improvise once you build that set. So it's like, wow, that was a really powerful choice, and it's just executed really well. Like the colors are perfect, and the costumes married with the set design is like flawless. And then you have like the whole undersea puppets and stuff, and like that's really cool, and don't ever get to see that really in movies. So I just think the whole thing is really great. But
it's interesting that you both picked films that do sort of wear their artifice on their sleeves a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's kind of a production designer-y thing, I guess. You like to notice your work, whereas like production design is really meant to not be noticed if it's done right.
Gotcha. Well, yeah. I think I've taken up enough of your time today. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for your contributions to this genre. Like I said, I think that they are significant and long lasting. We're going to be feeling the effects of what you guys have been doing in the genre for years and years to come. And I can't wait to see both your respective future work on display, hopefully in a theater.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Totally. Yeah. I just designed Simon Barrett's directorial debut called SEANCE. Should be coming out this spring, I
Okay.
think. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Hopefully. And I just finished a horror TV show called Them for Amazon, and I'm leaving to do a film for Ty West in New Zealand in a week. So we'll see.
Wow.
We have a set visit from them. That's an Amazon series, right?
Yeah.
And then we're sitting on it. We're waiting for them to tell us when that show's coming out. So I'll look for it.
Oh, fantastic.
Excellent. And thanks everyone for joining this Convo by Fango panel. Vote, please.
Please.
It's important. And we'll see you at the next one.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Yeah.